Dear Ambassador Toledo, thanks a lot actually for your time. It's such an honor actually for us to have this chance to interview you on behalf of Financial Times Chinese. And I want to start our interview with certain topics which can concern certain topics like geopolitics, the economic ties between EU, China, and also future business opportunities between EU and Chinese companies. So first, let's tackle with the economic issues. So this year, I noticed it's the 13th anniversary of the EU single market. And I think it's a big day, and it means a lot for Europe. Do you think actually a closely united Europe can be also benefit for the EU-China relationship in the future? And in which way do you think it can be?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Delighted to be with you in this rainy afternoon in Beijing. It is the 30th anniversary. We are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the single market in the European Union. We have achieved in these 30 years something which is very important for Europe, for China, and for the world, which is the largest single market in the world. And it is also the largest market for China. So this is very important for China. China has in the European Union its largest market for its goods. Sometimes people say, or some statistics say, that ASEAN is now the largest market for China, which, well, taken as such is true, but ASEAN is not a single market. What we have in the European Union is a single market, meaning that all goods can be accessed with a single set of rules, which is not the case with ASEAN or with other regional organizations. In the single market means that you have one set of rules if you want to export to this market. So it's the largest single market for China and for the rest of the world. It is the largest market in the world. We are very proud of that, but we are also very proud, and we are mainly proud because Europe, since the beginning in the 50s, was a project for peace. And we have achieved the longest period of peace in the territory of the European Union, of the 27 member states of the European Union in history. Unfortunately, not in Europe because of the Russian aggression on Ukraine over 1.5 years ago. But in the European Union, in the territory of the European Union, 27 member states, we have had the longest period of peace in the history. We have had also the longest period of growth, prosperity. We live in the region where human rights are most respected in the world, where we have the most developed welfare state in the world, and where freedoms, the rule of law, are generalized in all the countries of the 27 member states of the European Union. So there is a lot we have achieved. There is a lot that China, as a big economic power, is benefiting from, and we would like also our companies, the European companies, to benefit from the large, enormous market in China. Unfortunately, we think that we need a level playing field which is not there yet. So we are offering the Chinese companies a single set of rules for their exports. We would like to see progress in market access barriers that we see in China.
I'd like to continue with the second question, which is about the political relationship between EU and China. And since the perspective from the European side has changed quite a lot during the past 3 years when it looks at China. So how do you see that? And do you think like in the near future there will be also other political shifts in EU's China policy?
Well, the European perspective on China, as you said, has evolved. I wouldn't say it has changed, but it has evolved. But also the Chinese standing in the world has changed, has evolved. And the general geopolitical situation has evolved. And China has been a main actor in this changing of the geopolitical world. In 2019, the European Union described in its strategic outlook its relation with China as one of partnership, as one of competition, but also as one of systemic rivalry. This was a change from before, but the fact is that Chinese positions, Chinese policies, Chinese external policies and internal policies had also changed. So the change in the European perspective on China in 2019 was a reflection of the change of the position and of the attitudes and the policies of China inside and outside China. This description of China as a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival has been confirmed many times since 2019. The last time, a month ago, end of June, by the European Council, first by the Foreign Affairs Council and then by the European Council, meaning the 27 heads of state and government of the European Union. So it is a description which is shared by all 27 member states. We are partners because we need to partner in global challenges like, especially, fight against climate change, biodiversity conservation, and fight against pollution, for instance, but also on global health, on food security. Global challenges without cooperation cannot be effectively tackled by anybody. That's why we partner with China on those issues. We are competitors, especially in trade and investment, and that's why we want progress in market access issues, because we feel that we have no level playing field yet for our companies in China. We want to increase our exports to China, and we need to protect our investors who come to China, and there are a number of issues that are not solved and for which we want progress. And finally, we are systemic rivals because we must acknowledge that we have different systems and we have different views on things as important for us as human rights. We feel that human rights, we strongly believe that human rights are universal, that human rights cannot be divided into categories, and that there are international rules that have to be abided by, that have been signed also by China and have to be abided by. And we have an important differendo with regards a very recent issue, which is the brutal Russian unprovoked aggression on Ukraine. So this is something in which we have a big big differendo, and we want to convince China to join the rest of the international community in condemning this aggression and upholding the very basic principles of international law, especially of the UN Charter, meaning, especially, again, namely, the respect of the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of an independent country like Ukraine.
Okay, I see. Thanks a lot for your answer. So the next question will be about the economic relationship between the European and the Chinese side. Since you have mentioned actually EU-China should work hand in hand to fight against the climate change, for example. So maybe for the business communities, they can develop more projects together in the field such as e-mobility, like electric vehicles, and for example, solar panels, etc. How do you see like the future opportunities for the Chinese business in Europe, and also vice versa, the European business in China?
Well, before talking about the future, let's talk about the present. Last year, 2022, the trade between the European Union and China was about 2.3 billion euros, $2.5 billion a day. And that's huge. That's the largest trade between two blocks in the world. But unfortunately, it is very unbalanced, because last year too, China reached the Guinness Book of Records of all trade surpluses in the history in its trade relationship with the European Union. We know that China produces very good quality at good prices, but we think that the playing field is not leveled. There is no level playing field, because our companies are facing many obstacles when they want to export to China. There are a number of issues which have been listed by the European Union Chamber of Commerce, 967 obstacles to trade and investment by European companies in China. So we want to make progress in this. We need to make progress in this to allow European companies to have as good opportunities as the Chinese companies have in the European Union. We need transparency by the Chinese authorities in trade measures. We need predictability. Otherwise, we will be faced with calls for reciprocity. So transparency, predictability, and one very important thing, we need legal certainty. And unfortunately, recently, legal certainty has been hit by some measures. And I must say that some many European companies are concerned about the legal uncertainty that has been created by recent legislative measures like the counter-espionage law. European companies need legal certainty about what is considered national security, about what is considered a state secret. Having said that, as I said, we have an extremely important and intense economic relation. And as President von der Leyen has said only 2 months ago when she visited Beijing, we are not at all for decoupling. But two very important recent events, the pandemic and the Russian aggression on Ukraine, have taught us in Europe that we need to diversify risks. We cannot depend 90–80% on a single source for critical products and materials. That's why we are in a process of de-risking, of diversifying. But that doesn't mean decouple. It would be completely unrealistic and very expensive to decouple from China. It would be also completely unrealistic for China to try to decouple from us. So we are not into decoupling, we are into the risk. And to solve this issue and to show that we want engagement with China, we have resumed, along with the Chinese interlocutors, a number of very important dialogues, institutional dialogues with China. After the pandemic restrictions were lifted last January, we decided that we needed to resume these dialogues. In fact, even before the restrictions were lifted, we had President Michel, the President of the European Council, coming to Beijing, and that was the start of the resumption of our dialogues. We have had so far a dialogue which had been suspended for 4 years about human rights. In February, we have had the President of the European Commission coming here, coinciding with the state visit of the French President, Emmanuel Macron. We have had very recently the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, to hold the high-level dialogue on climate and environment. We will soon have, in September, the High Economic and Trade Dialogue, an extremely important dialogue to solve our differences and to make progress in market access issues which are needed for our relation to continue prospering. And we will have also a high-level digital dialogue and other dialogues in the autumn that will lead to a successful EU summit, presential, physical summit, later this year, probably in late autumn, when President von der Leyen and President Michel, the President of the European Commission and the President of the European Council, will visit Beijing to hold the EU-China summit for the first time in person.
Thanks for your previous answer. So next question will be about people-to-people exchanges. Since the beginning of the pandemic, there has been almost zero people-to-people exchanges between European and Chinese side, which is very unfortunate. And since you became the ambassador, and what do you expect from this area in the future? Do you think there will be much more exchanges between the two sides, between the two societies?
Well, I'm sure there will be more exchanges, because for 3 years, until January last year, people-to-people exchanges in person were almost impossible. The number of tourists visiting China, the number of students studying in China, the number of business people coming to China went down to zero. So people-to-people exchanges, after the restrictions were lifted, are slowly coming back. I'm not sure they will come back to previous levels, because 3 years of complete closure of borders have had their toll. We must work together to try and resume and to try to get back to previous levels of people-to-people exchanges. But unfortunately, we have to fight against the situation, which was extremely bad during 3 years, for 3 years. When you see now, even after the restrictions were lifted, the number of European students in China compared to the students that were before, it's really very concerning. When you see the number of businessmen coming, it's also concerning. They are slowly coming back. But we have to work together to try and foster these exchanges. These exchanges are incredibly important for a common understanding, for China to get to know Europe, and for Europe to get to know China, to avoid misunderstandings. There are developments which are not helping to resume previous levels. There are regulations in China which are not very helpful, which are not very conducive to these people-to-people exchanges. I'm talking of measures like the need for prior authorization for universities or for government-led think tanks to meet us embassies. This is not very conducive to free and open exchange, people-to-people exchanges. But of course, we expect people-to-people exchanges to grow slowly, and we want to convince the Chinese authorities to make also an effort to promote these exchanges by relaxing some of the regulations that have been put in place in the name of national security or others.
Yes. And actually, I'm from Symbol Consultant and also Symbol think tank as well, which is the think tank I founded after I returned from the European Union. And this is a non-governmental think tank which is actually committed into building a bridge between Europe and China, the two sides, the two society. So do you have some words for our future work? Do you have some expectation for us, organizations like us to feel the duty of the bridge to bring more people together?
Well, I can only encourage you to do it. We have contacts with a number of governmental, a lot of governmental think tanks, not so many non-governmental think tanks, although we are in contact with some of them. I think non-governmental think tanks would have a very important role to play So we can only encourage you to promote exchanges between us, Europeans, and Chinese.
Okay, thanks a lot for your time, Mr. Ambassador. It's such a pleasure.
A pleasure. The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much for coming
Okay.
to the European Union delegation. Always welcome.